IDBM Challenge, Season 1, Episode 5. He's the bad boy of academia. If there's someone who is rattling cages or coming up with provocative thoughts, he's your man. Join us in today's episode where we talk with Alf Rehn on dangerous ideas.
Hello everyone. I'm very happy to have Alf Rehn here with us today.
Pleasure to be here.
Alf is a very accomplished academic. You used to be a professor in management and marketing in Turku, but now you're on to new adventures.
Yeah. Now I used to be the chair of management and organization at Åbo Academy University, but I've recently moved to become the professor of innovation, design and management at the University of Southern Denmark.
Brilliant. And you're also a thought leader specifically in creativity and innovation.
Yeah, I'm not really fond of the term thought leader. It sounds a little wanky, to be perfectly frank. But I mean, yes, I've been called something like that.
So if not thought leader, what has been the most flattering title or thing that somebody has called you, in your opinion?
I have difficulties with flattery, and the most flattering thing anyone said to me, I won't repeat on tape. But I have a problem with kind of guru thought leader stuff, and at the same time I'm kind of interested in how academics can be more engaged with the general public discussion. So I might instead say that I'm happy about the fact that I've had the opportunity to talk about notions, and even more critical notions, about innovation and creativity in the public sphere. And if that makes me a thought leader, fine, I'll accept it. But I don't personally think that thinking can be led in the way an army can be led, or in the way a factory can be led. So therefore I kind of consider myself a writer and possibly a thinker and definitely an academic. But the more illustrious titles I sometimes struggle with.
Good point. And you're also an author.
I do write quite a lot, yeah.
Yeah, and you have had one book that is called Dangerous Ideas.
Yeah, it's possibly my most famous work, in the sense that it sold very well and was translated into a bunch of languages.
It's on my bookshelf
and
as well.
It was the story of that book is actually quite funny, because I was at a conference, as I so often am, and I'd given a keynote, and then the second keynote was a fairly well-known creativity consultant. And I thought, okay, I'll listen to this for a bit, and listen. And whilst I was listening, I got more and more angry, because I was seeing this guy on stage, and he was doing every cheap trick in the book. Every kind of, who here thinks creativity is an important part of their work? That whole kit and caboodle. So about halfway, I couldn't handle it anymore. So I quietly, without slamming doors, walked out of the conference room, directly into the bar, ordered a double gin and tonic, and called a publisher who for a long time had pushed me towards writing a more popular book. I said, I have a book for you. It's going to be named, and then I told the consultant's name, is full of shit. And it's going to be all about why creativity has been completely squandered and lost when these creativity consultants just try to make it into this wonderful, pretty little thing. And he paused for a moment and said, love the idea, but we need to work on the title. And therefore the title is not is stupid or whatever I told him, but is full of shit, but rather dangerous ideas.
Well, sounds a bit more academic, perhaps.
Well, not very much more
Not
academic,
actually.
but at least it sounds more sellable. That's
True.
what the publishers liked.
True. So then what is a dangerous idea?
In that book, I kind of play around with the idea that we are conditioned to see creativity as always this positive, lovely force. And as a continuance of this, we assume that when we are presented with something truly creative, we will appreciate it. But this is, of course, wholly and totally untrue, most of the times when we're presented with something that is truly innovative and creative, we don't understand it. It might even offend us. We might think it's stupid and childish, and we laugh. And now, of course, if you look back to history, we can see time and time again that people have done this. So people laughed at the first cars because they were clunky pieces of junk who seemed completely pointless, and we laughed at the internet. And now that means that today we kind of can look back and go, oh, how silly they were. They were such idiots. And we today, obviously, we'd never laugh at really great creative ideas. But we do. We have tremendous difficulty in actually seeing how something novel, something truly novel, something truly radically novel, how it can become something great. Because it rarely comes to us as this fully formed, perfect idea. Rather, it comes as something ridiculous, which we then so easily laugh at.
Well, how should organizations then be able to, what makes organizations truly creative? How can they bring out those ideas? How can they?
Creativity is not just about getting great ideas. It's kind of a holistic approach to ideas. That is, a truly creative company not only can kind of look at all the different kinds of ideas that emerges out of the company, but also have a dynamic conversation about what kind of creativity are we really comfortable with, what kind scares us, what don't we want to go into even though we see that it is there. And I try to emphasize that it's not about now you almost become even crazier and kookier, because that would be completely to misunderstand the point. Instead, it is almost a form of therapy, of understanding one's own approach to ideas, ideation and innovation, and to have a better reflexive understanding of it. So, for instance, I have a son who's almost 5, and because he looks at big kids, he wants to have fidget spinners. Because he's so little, he doesn't understand they've gone out of fashion already. So he loves his little fidget spinners, and I of course think that's the most stupid thing in the world. And I look at him and with love, of course, would go, oh my God, you're an idiot. But then, of course, I try to look back at myself. So, why do I judge him? I mean, why do I react against fidget spinners in that way? Is it because we didn't have them as a child, so therefore they must be shit? Is it because I don't see a functional point with them? Is it because I'm annoyed at anyone who's under the age of 20? So if they're playing with fidget spinners, I assume that it's part of their stupid things to do. And I'm not saying fidget spinners are now automatically a great innovation or automatically a creative. I'm saying that it's a good test for me to think about what I think about creativity, what I think about novelty.
So our students are going to work in multidisciplinary teams. So what should you, as a student, as a team member, what can you do to help cultivate a culture of creativity within your team?
I think a lot of the problems that emerges at a multidisciplinary team is, in a sense, our tendency to be so well behaved. So everyone kind of comes to the team meetings and they don't want to use their disciplinary knowledge too much, and they want to be very understanding and very so everyone immediately, when I talk to multidisciplinary teams, start actually behaving better and even too good for the team's good. That is, the designer, for instance, kind of somewhere in the back of his or her mind goes, oh, I better not use too many design phrases or too much design kind of vernacular or inside lingo. I'll explain it in a simple way to these engineering people or these business people, because they clearly can't understand really complex design language. And the business person goes, oh my God, it's a design person. Aren't they cute? Let's not use big words because they're not used to big words. Let's do drawings and post-it notes instead. I caricature, of course. But the best multidisciplinary teams I've seen have been the ones where people come in with respect, but also with self-respect, and say, no, if we're going to design it, we're going to design it properly. And this is the design process, and we're going to go through this process because I say so. In a sense, having pride in your own competencies. And where the engineer kind of goes, listen, we can dream all you want, but what we've drawn here, we can't do it. It is technically impossible, and I'll explain why. Because in that friction, when people actually talk in a real way, in a kind of thoughtful way, without being, of course, rude, that's where interesting things can happen. Because when the engineer starts pointing out certain basics of, let's say, tensile strength in a spaceship, whatever, then the designer can start asking, yeah, okay, I get you, but what if it wouldn't be a cone? What if it would kind of be inverted instead? I have no idea what that would mean, but then you can start having actually a real meeting of minds when people kind of take each other's competencies and start kind of playing kind of ping pong with them. Because otherwise you will get basically the equivalent of basically consensus policy that's so common to the Nordics, where nobody really wants to have a strong viewpoint, so we end up with the weakest, most watered down viewpoint of all. Let's do nice things for nice people.
Do you have some examples of that?
Of consensus policy or how multidisciplinary teams fail?
Both.
Well, I think that a lot of the time what we see in Nordic politics is that because of our rather peculiar forms of democracy, we end up not making any bigger reforms. Instead, we kind of have long arguments about whether index adjustment should be 1.2 or 1.25%. And in multidisciplinary teams, what I've sometimes seen is that because everyone wants to be on their best behavior, nobody really wants to push out a really radical idea, and instead people kind of recreate Uber for dogs or something like that, because it's something everyone knows and everyone's comfortable with, and nobody really has to start questioning. So that is the greatest problem of creativity, our tendency to be so very nice and so very, so very unlikely to want to provoke or push an issue.
Very interesting. You've said once that we live in an age of innovation porn.
Innovation porn? Yeah, I've talked about innovation pornography at length. Yes.
What do you mean? And you say innovation fatigue. What
innovation fatigue as well. Oh, those are two very different things, but they have a relationship. I've started talking about innovation pornography when I started kind of noting our tendency not to talk about innovation in general, but rather to pick certain pre-approved iconic images of innovation and then just repeating these. So for instance, look at the way in which the iPhone, which I also own, became a symbol of innovation. Now at first, obviously when the iPhone was introduced, people said, well, that's the dumbest thing I've ever seen. It's ugly with its rounded corners. It's too expensive. It's not functional enough. It's a hunk of junk, basically. And then it became spectacularly successful. And now every time when people give keynotes, I want to say we have to be more innovative. There, I guarantee you, there's going to be an iPhone or an iPad or something like that on the keynote slides. So, and that is, in a sense, what porn does. Porn takes certain specific acts and then takes away everything complex about them and just shows you the one kind of simplified iconic act. Now, real sex is messy. And not just end result, but in real sex involves sweating, involves bed sheets all over the place, involves people dropping off the bed. I mean, we've all been there. So it's not all that simple. But in the keynotes, or in pornography, we present it as this smooth process where everyone goes home happy. Yeah? And the same, real innovation is about as messy as real sex is. There's mistakes, and things get all muddled, and somebody needs a break, and what you thought was a good idea turned out to be a really bad idea, and then you need to kind of readjust according to that. If you have many people, regardless if it's sex or innovation, it gets even more complicated. But when you then read about it in the magazines, it's about, oh, we had an idea in which we wanted to save all the puppy dogs in this world, and we created this app, and now we're millionaires. Well, which never happens. It never happens that smoothly.
Then why is that story so alluring? Why does it...
Because we love porn. We love porn. We love the simplified story.
Yeah.
We love to to take away everything ugly, everything kind of problematic. So two beautiful people getting it on, whether it's in a garage or in bed, which ends in the way we all expect it to end, and then, we're finished. There is something alluring about that. But the problem is, just like if young kids watch pornography without really understanding sex, and then think this is what I have to do to be good in bed, that's going to be really, really tragic in the end. And I see young kids reading kind of, oh, I've read Fast Company, so now I know how to innovate. And then they go and then they realize, oh my God, it's been 6 months, I barely have a prototype, all my money's gone, and I must be a total loser. Without understanding, no, that's how it always goes. So I've railed against innovation pornography, not because I hate porn or because I want to kind of provoke with these kinds of analogies, but rather by saying, if we spread the word that you have to be like Elon Musk or you have to be like Steve Jobs and your innovation process must be this smooth and follow this specific path, we're actually diminishing innovation. We're actually creating kind of a stress for people when they go and try to do their innovation projects and all of a sudden realize just how messy and sweaty and dirty it can all be.
Brilliant. How should how should they act, but how should they address this?
I think a lot of organizations actually address it fairly well because, I mean, we have very innovative organizations in this world. The problem usually comes when you get a new, for instance, CEO who comes in and kind of wants to revolutionize everything, wants everything according to this new thing he read in a book from Harvard Business School Press, and who kind of tries to force a new form of innovation thinking on a company. Instead, good innovation leadership, which is separated from innovation management, good innovation leadership has to do with being able to handle very different processes in parallel. Sometimes an innovation process needs to be rather improvised, rather free form. Other times it's going to need far more structure, and both can coexist without there being a problem. But because we so often want to have it one way or the other, we want to kind of, no, we have to do it the Apple way or the Musk way or the Nokia way. At least if you're old enough, you remember the Nokia way. Then you kind of diminish it, and you create organizations where you've actually killed a lot of the ideas because they didn't fit into that specific funnel you wanted to create.
You mentioned that creativity is not about getting ideas, that you've never met a company that is lacking of ideas. So what is creativity then?
What I tried to kind of illustrate is we often, when we approach creativity, we think it is the act of generating new ideas.
Yeah.
And that might be true on an individual level, but on an organizational level, that is actually not really the case. Because organizations are, by stint of being kind of made up of humans, they are places which are actually teeming with ideas, because we human beings, we can't stop thinking of new ideas. All of us think of new ideas all the time. We sometimes forget them, we sometimes ignore them, but the notion that there would be a lack of ideas in an organization is a fundamental misunderstanding. There's tons of ideas in organizations, but organizations are also exceptionally good at killing ideas. That is, cultures, and I'm talking both on a micro and a meso and a macro level. On a micro level, we human beings are very good at killing each other's ideas by going, I don't know, doesn't really sound like a great idea to me. I mean, just little words, little phrases, little shrugs where we go, don't care. And a lot of ideas can die just because the culture isn't one that's prepared to listen, prepared to nurture. Then on a meso level, ideas of course need not just to be heard, but also then supported, with kind of structurally supported, which means that you need management who is prepared to listen to ideas regardless where they come from, and then pick the good ones and support them all the way up to becoming the seedlings of an innovation. And then on a macro level, there needs to be enough resources dedicated to ideas and to the testing of ideas that we can actually take them somewhere. But what some companies, I'm not saying all companies, but quite a few companies do, is that they don't really want to talk about the way their culture kills ideas, the way in which their people just yawn at ideas. And they don't want to talk about the fact that their managers might have already decided which ideas are good before ideas even come to the table. And they don't want to talk about their own lack in testing out stuff and experimenting. So instead they kind of go, no, we just have more ideas. And then they bring in, yet again, a creativity consultant who has a brainstorm, and we put up lots of multicolored post-it notes, and then we're not solving the problem. It's basically like you would get an almost dying person who has pneumonia, double-sided pneumonia, is high fever, and you kind of go, it's the fitness issue. You haven't worked out, and fitness helps for kind of beating this bug, so we're going to put you on a running track now and run you for 5 miles. That's not very good medicine, but it's exactly the way in which we treat creativity.
Yeah, you had a wordplay. Culture eats
creativity for breakfast. It's actually not mine. It's Peter Drucker's old saying, culture eats strategy for breakfast, in which, and it's one of the most quoted things in business overall. And I just made kind of a paraphrase on it, because although it's clear that culture eats strategy for breakfast, as Drucker taught us, it's also so that culture eats creativity for breakfast. In a culture that's not conducive to creativity, you can have enormous amounts of ideas born, but almost all of them dies. And then you actually won't get any kind of true creativity. You need to treat both of these parts, both of these segments.
So do you have like some tangible advice for management to allow? You also talked about cognitive surplus.
Yeah, that's actually Clay Shirky's old notion, in which it pointed out that society has a cognitive surplus. With the internet, among other things, we now have a capacity to do things like write blogs, work on Wikipedia, set up an amazing array of video on Vimeo and YouTube, and this kind of the cognitive work that goes into this is actually interesting from a societal perspective. But I also have tried to point out to management that their companies have a cognitive surplus. Yeah. All these people who feel they're not listened to, even though they might have tremendous ideas for the development of the company. And often when I lecture them to top management, I kind of use a little very simplified model in which I kind of point out that there are 4 R's. We like our 4R models and 7 S's and so on. But I mean, it's just a simple mnemonic. It's not. I never say that these are the only things you need, but it's 4 things that are simple to remember because they all start with the letter R. Mnemonic. First, respect. Often what kills creativity in a company is the lack of respect. That is, people do not feel respected and they don't feel listened to. And it takes very little to kill people's kind of desire to come up with new ideas. Because if they don't feel that they're respected, they're basically not ever going to bring new ideas to the table again. So I kind of start by asking, so do you actually know for a fact that in your organization, people aren't yawning, people aren't laughing, people aren't kind of telling rude jokes about the people who try to come up with new ideas? And every time the management kind of goes, it might happen, because they know that they haven't really worked on that. Then there's reciprocity. That is give and take. That is, I kind of point out that you can't just go yell to your organization, more ideas, more innovations, otherwise I'll whip ya. Because that's often what we do. We kind of say, we should generate more disruptive innovations. But we don't say, okay, and this is what I'll do to make that happen. There isn't the kind of continuous give and take on this issue. There isn't, often isn't a feeling in the kind of lower rungs of the organization that there is truly a benefit to bringing ideas to the table or trying to bring in an innovation. There's reflection, of course. That is, it's not, and which I started by talking about, it's not enough that we merely say we need more creativity. We need also reflect on what kind of creativity is accepted here. What kind of ideas excite us and which bore us. What kind of innovations are we trying to do, and are there innovations that don't look like that, that we're kind of subconsciously avoiding? And last but not least, responsibility. That is, that we need, and it links back to the notion of innovation pornography, we need to take responsibility of our conversation. We need to take, instead of kind of coming with these empty phrases about innovation and creativity, we need to start thinking, what does it actually mean? Now, I personally have many, many times said from stage, in media and so on, that people who use the term think outside the box should be met with violence. Now, I'm a peaceful person mostly, but I do believe if you ever say the words think outside the box, you should be slapped hard, because that's the only way to teach you properly. And I think also that people who hit other people who say think outside the box should go scot-free. There should definitely be no sanctions for this. It's for the betterment of society. Because think outside the box is one of these idiot bullshit phrases that means absolutely nothing, but which we still kind of just burp out in these conversations. Hey guys, let's think outside the box on this one. Who sits there and go, oh shit, yes, I have been thinking inside the box the entire time. Thank you, Frank, for helping me. No one has thought that ever, anywhere.
Yeah.
And we have tons of these. Innovate or die. Innovate or die. Stora Enso, which is a Finnish or Swedish Finnish or actually international company, is listed on stock exchange, multi-billion. They're huge. They're insanely big. They were founded in 1288. 1288, that's a long time. And of course they've innovated during this time, but on certain levels they're still doing the same thing. They're using wood, they're doing paper, sticking to their knitting. They know what they do. Yeah. It's not always so that you need to. We still buy Veuve Clicquot champagne, and they haven't innovated in a long time. And champagne, you, in a sense, can't even innovate upon because it's perfection. So, an innovator die, it's one more of these porn phrases. It sounds good, we kind of go, yeah. But it actually, there is no content there. It is simply an empty phrase. And that's why I talk about responsibility. It's not enough that we come with these phrases. We should disrupt, because disruptive innovation is so cool. Or we should innovate or die, or we should think more like Elon Musk. All of these are stupid and empty phrases, and if we don't take responsibility about them, and if we don't take responsibility regarding our innovation discourse, about the way we talk about this, then we won't build the kind of culture where creativity truly can thrive.
How can you make it, or, well, actually, I think I think better go into like some of the questions I actually want to ask you also, because time runs so fast. What can business leaders learn from science fiction?
Business leaders can learn a lot by any kind of fiction, really. But science fiction is particularly interesting, or any kind really of fantastical literature, because it extends the notion of what we consider possible. That is, science fiction has always been about imagining completely impossible worlds. And if we look at how science fiction has affected, for instance, innovation, we know that notions of, for instance, lasers, notions of mobile communications, and even notions of kind of information networks existed in science fiction long before we actually realized them in the real world. But there's one notion is simply that, picking up ideas. But there's another aspect to science fiction that's possibly even more important, and that is the what-if issue. So often when we think of science fiction, we think back to very simplistic things. We think Star Trek, we think Star Wars, stuff like that. But there's also a lot more challenging science fiction. Science fiction that, for instance, asks, what would society look like if, let's say, we never would have developed industrialism? What would our society look like today if we still had feudal lords? Or what what if we had all our current technology, but the entire planet was run by the military? Or what if the Soviets had won? What if we actually lived a communist utopia with all this technology? How would that change things? And that's, for me, even more important, because often when we think about future thinking and scenarios and so on, we subconsciously go towards kind of extensions of good things today. So, oh, we can go this fast today, then that means that in the future we can go this much faster, and so on. And science fiction can actually temper that. So, for instance, the notion that we live in a so much faster world is actually not really true, is it? I mean, it takes exactly as long to fly between Paris and Mexico City today as it did 30 years ago. Exactly. So actually, that's not even true. It's slightly slower today because Charles de Gaulle is such a dump. No? So actually, in some ways, we travel more slowly today. It probably took me longer to get to here today from Zurich than it might have done 25 years ago. But we don't think about that because we're trained in a certain kind of progress thinking.
Yeah.
So for instance, if we today talk about space exploration, going into space, it would be very simple to kind of go, oh, but now because we've gotten the internet so quick, that means that we can develop better materials, that means that we've got even better rockets, and therefore we can go to Mars on our holidays in let's say 50 years. But that builds on a lot of assumptions that might not come true at all. What if, for instance, we notice that the ecosystem, our precious biosphere, actually starts breaking apart, which hopefully not, but there are some signals that might have already done. We will have no money for space exploration, none, because frankly, you and me, or basically human beings staying alive, will be more important than shooting people into space. Why would we have space mining if we don't have clean water on the planet? Yeah. Why would put billions, not trillions of dollars into let's go to Mars if we suddenly realize, oh my God, we are going to be attacked by killer tornadoes every week from now until 20 years in the future? So maybe the future of space exploration is fuck all. Nothing. We simply can't afford it. There's no point with it. But we rarely think in this way because we're so trained in the logic of progress. And then science fiction, which specifically today has started coming with lots of interesting notions about, well, what about the planet? What about dystopias? What about creating actually zero growth or even negative growth societies? Can actually be very helpful for managers trying to think deeply about the future.
A cool view on it. You said that you were gonna become how is it, design and innovation professor?
My professorship is in innovation, design and management.
Innovation, design and management. So what role do you think design has to play when it comes to innovation?
I think design is incredibly important, particularly if we kind of go beyond the notion of design as simply creating the prettier thing. Because, well, if you think about it in a very pragmatic fashion, the big innovation challenge today is, of course, sustainability. How do we create a more sustainable society? Because I think the era in which we just created more and more toys for the boys is actually over. We can continue for a little while because consumer society is what it is, but over time we need to find more sustainable forms of innovation. And there, of course, design, which is incredibly important in thinking about, okay, how can we minimize resource usage? How can we create things that actually stand the test of time? How can we create something that's not just pretty for the moment, but which will look unfashionable in, like, say, 5 years or 10 years? Their design is in a critical space. But because we think so much of the, so to say, aesthetic aspects of design, rather than the more kind of resilient or sustained aspects of design, we've often missed out on this. And working in Denmark, it's quite interesting because you can always use one specific example: mid-century furniture design. Because in Denmark, during mid-century, middle of last century, you had this boom in furniture design. And the fun thing is we still use a lot of those chairs. It's the kind of Eames-like chairs. It's the kind of classic Danish, very simplistic, minimalist lines. That stuff has stood the test of time, and we still kind of purchase them. We purchase them as used, as vintage pieces. We compare in Finland slightly to Aratec, for instance. Because these were not people designing for next season. These were people designing for, if not eternity, then at least for a long, long period. And I think we need to get back to that, of not just designing because, oh, this amuses me for the moment. This is so now.
Fast fashion.
Exactly. But instead, how do we create the kinds of things that create, both in industrial design, in design for everyday use, and in kind of big systems design, something that truly stands the test of time. So I believe it's not just kind of a nice addition to innovation. I think it's central to innovation, because for me, real innovation is also the kind of things that have long-term meaning, and creating something that has long-term meaning without design is nigh on an impossibility.
Yeah, you talked earlier about what if. I think that's one design method that is quite used. How do you see design and future planning? What links are there?
There are, of course, lots of links, and it's always good to have designers with you in kind of scenario planning. And of course, many designers use interesting forms of scenario planning to think about their own work. So it's actually too big a question to answer briefly, but I can say that the best kind of futures thinking work I've been part of, where designers have been cases where we've looked very much at what will be the everyday of tomorrow. That instead of kind of asking the big picture, so will we have more populism and so on, which can be interesting, would rather go down to okay, let's imagine a morning in, let's say, Helsinki in 2030. From the moment mom gets out of bed till the moment kids get through the door. And then start asking ourselves, what kind of things will they touch? What kind of will they talk to their machines, or will they touch their machines? Will they wave at their machines? Will it just be a Jarvis-like artificial intelligence that will think with? And often then, designers who tend to be trained to think about small, to some imperceptible details, are the ones who come with the best forms of thinking. So a good friend of mine who's a designer, Dan Saffer, for instance, we had a long conversation about notions such as gestures and household equipment. So we talked about, so in the future, will we kind of be waving at our fridge to open? And I said, no, of course we won't, because that would be stupid. Because sometimes you wave ironically, because you're doing so, and then the fridge opens. Or imagine you try to kind of have a gesture for let's make me a coffee, and you go this, but then you decide you wanted to explain to your son a dribbling technique you saw on football yesterday, and you go like this, oh no, not the coffee! So, and that, I hadn't thought about that. I hadn't thought about the problematics of using gestures in a house that can see gestures.
Yeah.
But Dan immediately went there.
Yeah.
He immediately thought about, no, that won't work because these other things might happen.
Yeah.
And that's why I think design is so brilliant, because it gives an entirely different and often far deeper insight into these kinds of the small everyday things that then big things are actually created out of. So clearly there are lots of things, and I've had a lot of fun with, for instance, working with designers saying, what will a coffee mug look like in 50 years? Because you might think that it's going to look exactly why would a coffee mug, the Moomi mug is eternal. No? But then you start asking questions about such as, so how will we take caffeine in the future? Will we inject it? Take it as pills? Will we be able to have coffee beans, because they are also subjected to the climate change issues we're subjected to? Will we be able to use Nespresso machines, which are problematic for many sustainability reasons? Will we bring small coffees, big coffees? Will we be inhaling something, kind of a gas that's caffeine? There's many possibilities which way a mug could go. But if you kind of most management people kind of go, well, the Moomy mug has sold well, I assume it'll sell well in the future as well. And that's also where designers can come in and kind of say, no, the future can be a much weirder place than we imagine today.
So bring a lot of imagination into the pot.
We need to bring imagination, and not just the kind of nice kind of imagination, let me think of the most fun, pretty things I can imagine, but also the kind of nasty kind of imagination. I mean, it's interesting when you look back and look at, for instance, what's sometimes known as paleo futures. That is what people wrote in the 30s, the 40s and 50s about the future. And particularly, it's so cute to study what they said about kitchens. Because they all explained that kitchens would clean themselves and make automated food, which isn't that far from the truth. But what they missed out on was the fact that nobody is going to be in the kitchen. Because the kids are going to be in their rooms, one on Instagram, one on Snapchat. Dad's going to be wherever because he's long gone. Mummy's going to be eating in front of Netflix. The notion that we'd sit together and eat in the kitchen, which they assumed is eternal and absolute, was completely blown up. And the notion that you'll have families with daddy, mommy and two kids, a boy and a girl, and it's always the girl who's younger, which was very much in the kind of 40s and 50s kind of American imagination. Of course, we know that today the single parent household is basically the default value, and the notion of the kind of four-person family that sits together in a kitchen, it's so rare that we have to send in ethnographers to document them before they go extinct.
True.
No.
Yeah, good points. Brilliant. What time is it?
It's
20 past.
20 past 2.
Yeah.
Okay, I think I have I was wondering if you can give the students. So these are, master students.
Yep.
They're, I don't know, maybe 22 to 35. Coming, half of them are international.
Yep.
Coming to this buzzword program, thinking they're gonna come out as business managers. What advice do you have for the students of IDBM?
Should I do this in camera? The important thing to ask about business education in the future is, will there even be such a thing? That is, we always assume that certain things, such as the business school, are eternal and that we'll always need managers. But that's not even remotely true. We can full well see a world without business schools. We can full well see that artificial intelligences take over many roles that today have been considered those of management. But what we'll always need are human beings with imagination, creativity and curiosity. People who can span disciplines, who can look beyond the simplified segmentation of the world into design worlds, management worlds, production worlds. So I do think that you are an interesting program, and I do think that you have a lot you can achieve in the future. But you can only do so if you take responsibility over this multidisciplinary approach and never get too comfortable with the management degree.
I have one last thing, and then we have a little bit of an association play. We've done this with a
free association.
Free association,
Is this the one where I'm just supposed to give a word, no explanation, or?
Exactly. Well, I'm gonna ask for explanation if it it's
required.
very So it's one word, or one sentence. So let's go. Success.
Money.
Technology.
Critical.
Space, like outer space.
Infinite.
Innovation.
Problematic.
Business.
Diminishing.
Future.
Taboo.
Strategy.
Boring.
Design.
Pretty.
IDBM.
I wanted to say GBQI.
Okay, good. IMDB.
GBQ.
Good for you. It's IDBM is the short
I know
that
perfectly
program.
well what it was, but I always find abbreviations so odd.
Yes,
Yeah.
good. You got an odd
Yeah.
answer back.
Yeah.
Why do you think innovation is problematic?
Because the things I work with all the time has to do with the way in which innovation has been turned into a problem. That is, I engage myself a lot with the problems we have around innovation, why it's become simplified, dumbed down, infantilized. So it's just my headspace is when you say innovation, I think the problems and the problematics thereof.
And you said money with success, right?
It was simply me being honest. Do I think that success necessitates money? No, not necessarily. In some kind of when I think about things more broadly, I do equate success with other things besides money. But at the same time, equate people who kind of go, oh, I don't care a lot. I don't care really about money, to be either very naive or lying. So yesterday in Switzerland, I met a man who said he didn't care anything about money, which is pretty easy to say when you own 100% of a company that's worth 20 billion euro. I wouldn't care about money either if I had 20 billion euro. I would be the world's kind of most zen person, because after the first 10 billion, money doesn't really matter anymore. But up until the first 10 million, yeah, I found that it matters. Matters quite a lot.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah. It's
It's a curious thing.
yeah, it's the same as all designers and such like. No, it's you always get asked to do jobs for visibility. But I found that it's very difficult to buy toys with visibility, and it's very difficult for my kids to be kind of go to bed and with a full stomach if I feed them only visibility. I've tried, but it
doesn't
simply
work
doesn't
out.
work.
Ah,
Yeah.
well, good lesson learned. Thank you so much, Alf.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
Likewise.
Okay, done.